Chapter 21, Paul goes to Jerusalem. He takes funds from the Gentile churches to give to the Jerusalem church because of concerns financially for them. He visits James there in Jerusalem. In 27, we find that he's arrested in the temple, that those Jews from Asia recognize him as his preaching, I guess, from Ephesus and Corinth. And they make a big riot over it, whereas the Romans come out from the garrison to take him. The tribune is at a point where he is going to scourge him, but then he realizes he's a Roman citizen, and things become different in that you don't scourge those that are Roman citizen without, you just don't do it. He had no trial, and they were going to do this prior to a trial. He confronts the mob before he is taken, and they shout him down. We come to he's taken by the Romans to the Sanhedrin in chapter 22, and we find this interesting dialogue that we have between the Sadducees and Pharisees, and Paul, being a Pharisee and zealous for that, he recognizes the crowd, that there's Sadducees and Pharisees, so he starts talking about the resurrection. Of course, the Sadducees don't believe in resurrection, the Pharisees do, so they start arguing among themselves. And so the Roman tribune takes him out because they're not getting anywhere with Sanhedrin, who brought the Jews that brought the charges. So now he takes him to Felix of Caesarea. And that's where I want to begin tonight, chapter 24. Well, first of all, let me go back to, it was pointed out last time, I missed, let's go to 23, verse 12. Let's back up a little bit. Chapter 23, verse 12. Now this is after he spoke to the Sadducees, Pharisees, the Sanhedrin, and the tribune takes him out, and so he wants to take him to out to protect him. And it says in verse 12 of chapter 23, when it was day, the Jews made a plot and bound themselves by an oath neither to eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. There were more than 40 who made the conspiracy. They went to the chief priests and elders and said, "We have strictly bound ourselves to an oath to taste no food till we have killed Paul. Now therefore you along with the council, give notice to the tribune to bring him down to you, as though you were going to determine his case more exactly, and we are ready to kill him before he comes near." Now the son of Paul's sister. Now we don't hear much about Paul's family, but here we are. We have his sister. Son of Paul's sister, his nephews, heard their ambush, so he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Paul's father was he received his Roman citizenship through ancestry, passed down, and there's not much said about his family, so we don't know much about that. And speculation could be made, but I don't want to get into that tonight about the nephew and the sister. But evidently the sister his sister still loves him enough. The nephew loves him, cares for him, so they bring this news to him. Paul called one of the centurions and said, "Take this young man to the tribune, for he has something to tell him. Now, where Paul is incarcerated here is very relaxed. He's not pinned into a cell. He's a Roman citizen. He's only been accused. In fact, they're trying to find out the accusation. They haven't found that out. So he has guards, but he's not in a jail cell, so to speak. It's pretty relaxed. So he took him and brought him to the tribune and said, Paul the prisoner called me and asked me to bring this young man to you, as he has something to say to you. The tribune took him by the hand and going aside asked him privately, "What is it you have to tell me?" And he said, "The Jews have agreed to ask to bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire somewhat more closely about him, but do not be persuaded by them, for more than 40 of their men are lying in ambush for him, who have bound themselves by an oath neither to eat nor drink till they have killed him, and now they are ready, waiting for your consent." So the tribune dismissed the young man, charging him, "Tell no one that you have informed me of these things." See, here's Paul, a Roman citizen. This Roman official, they've got to take very careful. They would be very careful with him because he's a citizen. He hasn't really been charged. They're trying to figure out why so much commotion. But they have to take very care of him. And it says in verse 23, so he called 2 of his centurions and said, "Get ready 200 soldiers with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen, and go as far as Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night. Also provide mounts for Paul to ride and bring him safely to Felix the governor." And he wrote a letter in this effect: Claudius Lysias. Now this Lysias, he was a Greek, and this is the tribune's name. He was a Greek, and remember we talked about last week how that he asked Paul, how much did your citizenship cost? Because see, he had to pay a heavy amount for his. So he asked, how much did yours cost? And so Paul explains to him, it was basically, it came down to him, that it was provided. He says, to his excellency, the governor, Felix, greeting. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them, when I came upon them with the soldiers and rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman citizen. And desiring to know the charge for which they were accusing him, I brought him down to their council. I found that he was being accused about questions of their law, but charged with nothing deserving death or imprisonment. And when it was disclosed to me that there would be a plot against the man, I sent him to you at once, ordering his accusers also to state before you what they have against him. So the soldiers, according to their instructions, took Paul and brought him by night Antipatris, and on that next day they returned to the barracks, letting the horsemen go on with him. And they had come to Caesarea and delivered the letter to the governor by presented Paul also before him. On reading the letter, he asked what province he was from, and when he had learned that he was from Cilicia, he said, "I will give you a hearing when your accusers arrive," and he commanded him to be guarded in Herod's pectorium. Again, he's not, it's very loose. Very loose. It's not something that he's putting into a dungeon. Very taken care of. It says, chapter 24, and after 5 days the high priest Ananias came down with some elders and spokesmen on one Tertullus. They laid before the governor their case against Paul, and when he had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, "Since through you we enjoy much peace." Now, this is ironic. This guy starts out saying, "In you we have much peace." Well, Felix had, there was a commotions, there was a tension between Jews and Gentiles, and this governor took the he caused a lot of casualties by his leadership upon the Jewish part of that. And so when this spokesman for the Sanhedrin comes up and says, with all these flowery speeches, well, it's contrary to actually what takes place, but it was customary that would take place. Since though we enjoy much peace, that is contrary. And since by your foresight, most excellence, Felix, reforms are being made for this nation, in every way and everywhere, we accept this with all gratitude. And he's just pouring it on. But to detain you no further, I beg you, in your kindness, hear us briefly. For we have found this man a plague, one who stirs up riots among all the Jews throughout the world, and is a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. If you go to, as I understand it, if you go to the Middle East, even today, in the Arab nations and so forth, Christians are known as Nazarenes. They might be spoken of that way. Nazarene, Jesus from Nazareth, so that's where we get the Nazarene. He even tried to profane the temple, but we seized him. By examining him yourself, you will be able to find out from him about everything in which we accuse him. Now, he even tried to profane the temple, but we seized him. We seized him. Well, no, they didn't seize him. They were about ready to tear him apart, what they're doing. He's like saying, well, our temple guards went out there and got him because he's profaning the temple. He doesn't go into explicits about how it was done, when it was done, and so forth. It's very general, this accusation. The Jews also joined in the charge, affirming that all these things were so. And when the governor had nodded to him to speak, Paul replied. Paul is a very intelligent man, very intelligent, very educated. Knowing that for many years you have been a judge over this nation, I cheerfully make my defense. You can verify that it is not more than 12 days since I went up to worship in Jerusalem. And they did not find me disputing with anyone or stirring up the crowd either in the temple or in the synagogue or in the city. Neither can they prove to you what they now bring up against me. But this I confess to you, that according to the way which they call a sect, I worship the God of our fathers, believing everything laid down by the law written in the prophets, having a hope in God which these men themselves accept, that there will be a resurrection of both the just and the unjust. Now, again, the Sadducees don't believe in that, and yet the Pharisees do. And this idea of the sect. See, one thing that kept Roman law away from Christianity is that they thought it was a sect of Judaism. It took the Roman government a while to figure out that Christianity was something far different than Judaism. But they thought it was a sect. And you take Judaism at this point, as Paul's teaching, many of them thought it was a sect as well, that it wasn't different, and that it was just a part of Jewish faith. But that's to the contrary. And we talked about how the customs and the Mosaic law that was so involved in the Jews and the Christian Jews, so much of the demands they put upon the Gentiles, the Mosaic law. But you get into the history of this, we get Nero and you get some of those others after him. They understand it's not just a sect. This is something totally different. Totally different. And then it goes contrary to their way of life. And it's amazing to me, that Rome basically just gave Israel almost anything they wanted. I mean, you look at the Sanhedrin, they had their own penalty. They could cause their own activity and penalty. They gave Paul the license to go out and bring those in. They persecuted those Christians, those early Christians of Saul. Saul could bring them in. The Jews had their own basic pattern for governing their people through the Sanhedrin. And the Romans allowed them to do this as long as it wasn't contrary to Roman law. They could do this. Verse 16 says, so I always take pains to have a clear conscience toward both God and man. Now after several years I came to bring alms to my nation and to present offerings. While I was doing this, they found me purified in the temple without any crowd or turmoil. But some Jews from Asia, they ought to be here. See, here's the point. Why aren't my accusers here? These Asia Jews, Ephesus, Corinth, that heard Paul speaking, there was outrage because the Mosaic law wasn't enforced in his preaching for these Gentiles. Why aren't they here? They're accusing me. You can verify that it is not more than 12 days since I went up to worship in Jerusalem, and they did not find me disputing with anyone, stirring up the crowd either in the temple or in the synagogues or in the city. Neither can they prove to you that they now bring up against me. But this I confess to you, that according to the way which they call a sect, I worship the God of our fathers, believing everything laid down by the law and written in the prophets, having a hope in God, which these men themselves accept. There will be a resurrection of both the just and unjust. So I was always take pains to have a clear conscience toward both God and man. Now after several years I came to bring alms to the nation, to present offerings. While I was doing so, they found me purified in the temple and without any crowd or turmoil. But some Jews from Asia, they thought they ought to be here before you and make an accusation, should they have any against me. Or else let those men themselves say what wrongdoings they found when I stood before the council. Other than this, one thing that I cried out while standing among them, it is with respect to the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial before you this day. And that was the key. And it's like the Tribune said, he found nothing in Paul that was wrong. And the only thing that was there is that he takes them to the council and he raises the issue of the resurrection, and that puts the Sanhedrin into a fizzy, because part of them didn't believe it and part of them did. You know, when we look at the Jews, they have a history of just being fussy. You know, it's just God's patience with Judaism. And the fact that AD 70, that when they revolted against Rome, that was all pride. They were saying, we're God's people. And it was destroyed. But it's that pride, that pride, that they were God's people, that they were special, and this attitude that comes out in this trial indicates that. Verse 22, it says, but Felix, having a rather accurate knowledge of the way, he was familiar with it. He was familiar with Christianity, but put them off, saying, when Lysias, the tribune, comes down, I will decide your case. Then he gave orders to the centurion that he should be kept in custody but have some liberty, and that none of his friends should be prevented from attending his needs. Paul has freedom here in this, even though he's kept. After some days, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, and he sent for Paul and heard him speak about faith in Christ Jesus. And as he reasoned about righteousness and self-control and the coming judgment, Felix was alarmed and said, go away for the present. When I get an opportunity, I will summon you. See, here's the thing. Felix was not a really moral kind of an individual. His wife at this time, Drusilla, she was probably about 20 years old. She had been married before and persuaded to leave that marriage and come to Felix. And she is, like I say, 20 years old approximately this time. So you have this man of God speaking to them about self-control, righteousness, and they're not feeling comfortable with it. They don't feel comfortable with this. And it says in verse 26, at the same time, he hoped that money would be given him by Paul. Now this is interesting too, because if you take Roman society, Roman organization, courts, things would work through the courts. But it wasn't beyond the governor to take some money to quicken it. And that's what Felix is looking at. He wants some money. He's going to make this faster. Give Paul maybe a positive sentence. Just give me some money. So money's involved in this. So here Paul is. He's innocent. I mean, you take part of the Sanhedrin, part of them recognize him being didn't find fault in him. Sadducees of the Sanhedrin did because of the fact of the resurrection. Tribune didn't find any problems with him. Felix is not finding any problems with it. Felix wants money. So Paul's in the midst here. But you remember what Jesus said to Paul before this. Nothing's going to happen to you. You're going to witness for me in Rome. And that's where he's going. He's going to Rome. Nothing's going to take place. And Paul knows this. So he sent for him often and conversed with him. When 2 years had elapsed, now man, 2 years he's in Caesarea, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus. And desiring to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison. 2 years he's been with Felix. No charge, nothing brought about to him. And we know Lysias, the tribune, came back. Nothing there. We read what he said about the account. Nothing there. But see, Felix, there was a lot of commotion between Jews and Gentiles in this part while he was governor. And so wanting, because of his hardness on the Jews, here he is trying to pacify the Jews. And so he's going to keep Paul longer so the accusations may come up again from Jerusalem. And then Paul would be possibly found guilty. So he wants to pacify the Jews. Chapter 25, it says, Now 3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea, and the chief priests and the principal men of the Jews laid out their case against Paul, and they urged him, asking as a favor against Paul that he summon him to Jerusalem, because they were planning an ambush to kill him on the way. So Festus, just coming in, he comes to Caesarea, he goes down to Jerusalem. He wants to get to know the inhabitants there, and they jump on it. They want Paul in Jerusalem. They want Paul in Jerusalem. Festus replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea and that he himself intended to go there shortly. So said he, Let the men of authority among you go down with me, and if there is anything wrong about the man, let them bring charges against him. After he stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea, and the next day he took his seat on a tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. When he had arrived, the Jews who had come down to Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many and serious charges against him that they could not prove. Charges that they could not prove. Paul argued in his defense, Neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, Do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and there be tried on these charges before me? Now, what kind of chance would he have for that? Paul was never was in Jerusalem for long periods of time since he became a Christian. Remember, he's on the missionary trips. He's working with Gentile churches. And his preaching got to Jerusalem, was received, and they understood what he was saying. Judaizers would go out, confuse the Gentiles. And we find that in those letters, Corinth and so forth, Ephesus, Ephesians, confusing them with the Mosaic requirement. And here he is. He doesn't go into Jerusalem much. And when he went, he took alms from Gentile churches. Perhaps trying to say, okay, you're in trouble, Jerusalem. Look who's bringing you help. Gentiles. And the Judaizers, the Jews, jump on it. And they try to arrest him. So what chance does he have if he goes to Jerusalem? But Paul said, I am standing before Caesar's tribunal, where I ought to be tried. Now, what he's saying is here, I'm a Roman citizen. I have a right to be tried by Caesar. I have a right to be tried by Caesar. As a Roman citizen, you had that right. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you yourself know very well. If then I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything for which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death. But if there is nothing to their charges against me, no one can give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar. Then Festus, when he had conferred with his council, answered, to Caesar you have appealed, to Caesar you shall go. So it starts this journey to Rome. You see how God's working in this? He persecutes the church, Saul of Tarsus. God takes this man who persecuted the church, this educated Pharisee, moving up in high order in the Jewish system, very educated, zealous, persecuting, taking families, splitting them apart, some to death perhaps, some to death, some zealous for the law. And God takes a man like that, turns him around, and uses him. There's a lesson in there for us. You never give up on people. Never give up on people. At work or whatever else, you don't give up on people. God didn't give up on Saul of Tarsus. He turned him around and used him. And he used him in a way, just consider this. To a Jew, a Gentile is nothing more than an unclean person. You don't go into their house. You don't eat with them. You do nothing with them. He takes this Pharisee and he sends them to the place, to those people that he dismissed as a Jew, to teach them the gospel. To teach them the gospel. And God is using him now. He's done 3 missionary journeys, established his congregations. Now God's going to send him to Rome. In verse 13 it says, Now when some days had passed, Agrippa, the king of and Bernice arrived at Caesarea and greeted Festus. And as they stayed there many days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, There is a man left prisoner by Felix. And when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews laid out their case against him, asking for a sentence of condemnation against him. I answered them that it was not the custom of the Romans to give up anyone before the accused met the accusers face to face and had opportunity to make his defense concerning the charge laid against him. So when they came together here, I made no delay, but on the next day took my seat at the tribunal and ordered the man to be brought. When the accusers stood up, they brought no charge. They brought no charge in the case of such evils as I supposed. Rather, they had certain points of dispute with him about their own religion and about a certain Jesus who was dead, but whom Paul asserted to be alive. Being at a loss how to investigate these questions, I asked whether he wanted to go to Jerusalem and be tried there regarding them. But when Paul had appealed to be kept in custody for the decision of the emperor, I ordered him to be held until I could send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I would like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, he said, you will hear him. So there's nothing there. And so 23 says, so on the next day Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp. Well, there's one point I wanted to make. Verse 19, rather they had certain points of dispute with them about their own religion and about certain Jesus. See, their own religion. So here's the Roman authorities taking the Jewish religion and putting Christianity as a sect as part of that. They consider it to be one. So they're allowing this religion to grow, and when it grows to a point, they're going to understand that it is not Judaism, something entirely different. But right at this point, they think it's just part of Judaism. So on the next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp, and they entered the audience hall with the military tribunes and the prominent men of the city. Then at the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. And Festus said, King Agrippa, and all who are present with us, you see this man about whom the whole Jewish people petitioned me, both in Jerusalem and here, shouting that he ought not to live any longer. The whole nation. But I found that he had done nothing deserving death, and as he himself appealed to the emperor, I decided to go ahead and send him, but I have nothing definite to write to my Lord about him. Therefore I have brought him before you all, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after we have examined him, I may have something to write, for it seems to be unreasonable to sending a prisoner not to indicate the charges against him. Isn't that incredible? There's nothing there. Nothing there. It's the same thing with Jesus.
You notice the sad commentary here about the judges, those questioning people in authority that could release him, but they're kind of hanging on to the fringes of possibility. Sounds like American law.
Politics.
Politics
Yeah.
indeed.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yes, yeah. Oh, we're going to get into it now. I hate to say this. I truly do. Sometimes I wonder about our judicial system, how it's not, they're getting away from the Constitution, it seems like. Making their own determinations. You can have a people in California vote for something, and one judge, one man can terminate that vote. One man can terminate it on politics, on a whims, on what he wants. That's corruption. But that's what we're facing. That's what we have. Mm-hmm. That's Festus. No, Festus is not a Christian. No, the Lord he's talking about. Yeah, that's it. Capital L, capital O, lowercase L, lowercase O, lowercase D. Lord. Yeah, that's a title of a man. Yeah. Yeah, it's just a title of a man. That's what that refers to. Yeah. But the point is, it's like Emmett said, there's nothing found here. And even when they went to the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees stood up and said, there's nothing wrong with this guy. But look who pushed it, the Sadducees. Remember when Jesus was teaching and the Sadducees came up because they didn't believe in the resurrection and questioning about it? Whose wife, whose mother, wife?
Well, back to home again, we had two top officials heading an investigation today to express how many witnesses they had screened, had many more lined up to question, but when their decision comes, they will not reveal their sources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Shady, isn't it? It seems shady. Yeah. We'll pick up on 26 next week. But yeah, it's shady. It's challenging. But that's our culture.